We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, wrote the Apostle Paul. And as we said yesterday, the prospect of judgment sometimes perhaps fills us with trepidation. If we're honest with ourselves, most of us at times will feel a little that way. But we shouldn't feel that way. And this morning I'm going to try and leave you with the confidence that you can face the judgment seat without fear. There is no need for it if we use the prescription, the divine prescription that is laid down for us. In Hebrews chapter 12, the Apostle Paul contrasts two mountains. He says, we've come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem. But the other mountain, of course, was the mountain to which Israel came when they were constituted as Yahweh's people. And that mountain was a mountain of judgment, and it is going to be a mountain of judgment. There's no question, and today's session, especially tomorrow's session, we'll be able to demonstrate that this is the place where we'll go. But we haven't come, he says, to a mountain that might be touched or that burn with fire, the blackness and darkness and tempest that even Moses greatly feared and quaked. He goes on to say at the end of that chapter, wherefore we receiving a kingdom which cannot be moved, let us hold fast to grace. And that's going to be the key element of our study this morning. Let us hold fast to grace whereby we may serve God acceptably with reverence and godly fear for our God. And he reminds us of what he is. He will not tolerate evil. He cannot countenance iniquity and sin. He will not abdicate his righteousness. He will not step down from his lofty principles for man. They must be acknowledged by man. His righteousness must be upheld. He is a consuming fire. He will not clear the guilty, he declared to Moses on the mountain. So he's not a God to be tampered with. But he is a God of grace to those who come to him in the appropriate way. Brother Jeff, I think, quoted these words in his first class on Monday. But those words were written by John, brothers and sisters, specifically to do with the judgment seat. He said this in 1 John 4:17 and 18. Herein is our love made perfect, that we may have boldness. Now the word boldness in the Greek means frankness of speech. No diffidence to speak at the judgment seat in the day of judgment. So it's definitely about that subject. Because as he is, so are we in this world. There is no fear, and the word in the Greek is phobos. We get phobia from it. There is no dread or terror in love, he says, and we know that this is the word agape. But perfect, Greek word teleos, means complete. Complete love casts out fear, because fear has torment or terror. He that feareth is not made complete in love. Now these are typically profound words from the Apostle John, but they're quite simple. Very, very simple in what they're saying. They're saying that if we have got our direction in life right, if we have chosen to pursue a certain course, the narrow way that leads to the kingdom, and we're determined to stay on that path, and we are totally committed to it, and we are prepared to sacrifice everything else in order to maintain that direction, well, that's complete agape, complete sacrificial love. Now that's not an unreasonable thing, is it? The Lord Jesus Christ said to his disciples, except you take up your cross daily and follow me, you have no part with me. So it's simply about commitment. Full commitment. Yahweh demanded of Israel, thou shalt love Yahweh thy God with all thy heart, and with all, he didn't say half, he said all thy heart, and all thy strength, and all thy might. He just wants commitment. And so if you've got that, you've got perfect love. You have absolutely no need to worry. But you say, but I'm not always like that. I sin. Well, of course, and so do I. There are times in our life when we get off that path. We go through rough patches. We have difficulties that circle around and take another bite out of us. You like that? Well, of course you're like that. Otherwise you're of a different kind than me. So what does God do? He just wants us to get up on that path again and recommit. And the process, of course, is through forgiveness. And we'll talk a bit about that this morning. Now, I thought it appropriate, seeing that I did make a statement about the length of the judgment, to give you at least some proof of it. The ark began its journey to Zion about 13 months after Israel left Egypt. We're told that in Numbers 10, verse 11. The ark and the tabernacle were constructed from materials brought out of Egypt. We're going to see tomorrow that when that ark finally came under David to its rightful resting place in Zion, he wrote a psalm. It was Psalm 68, and he talks about the ark going from Sinai to the sanctuary, but he doesn't actually have the ark in mind. The ark and its movement from Sinai to the sanctuary is the basis of what he's talking about, but he's talking about the march of Christ and the saints from Sinai to the sanctuary, which is inherent proof that the judgment process and certainly the immortalisation process of the saints will take place at Sinai. The process leading to the manifestation of the glory of God at Sinai in the tabernacle is recorded for us in Exodus chapter 40, verse 34, took a little under 12 months. You know what happened on that dramatic day, the first day of the first month of the second year out of Egypt? All of the preparations had been completed. All the furniture of the tabernacle had been made. Everything was ready to be assembled, but was all sort of just all over the place. But in one day, the whole thing went together. And what was not before their eyes in the morning was before their eyes in the afternoon. And the glory of God filled it. And the cloud filled that structure, the tabernacle. Now, what does that represent, do you think? Materials taken out of Egypt, just like you and I, taken out of Egypt, brought to Sinai by a process made into all of these wonderful parts of the tabernacle, including the ark of the covenant with its cherubim joined to the mercy seat in the one piece of gold. We know what that represents. Christ, the mercy seat, cherubim, the saints. And the Shekinah glory now appears in the midst of that cherubim. What does that represent, do you think? Well, the immortalisation of the saints. It was all there, typically laid out. And it's going to happen to you and me, brothers and sisters. Shortly, I believe. So the conclusion that we can take, without going into all the details, the conclusion that we can make from what we read back there in Exodus is that from the time the responsible are gathered from the nations, Egypt, to their glorification will be about 12 months, because that's what it took in the wilderness. Now, that's not too long a process to endure, is it? 12 months for the judgment process to be complete. The next 12 months, you saw the other day, is when Christ, having taken his bride, will go around and personally meet every member of it. He will cheer up his wife in accordance with Deuteronomy 24, verse 5. Now, I haven't got my Bible out, but you like to open yours at 2 Corinthians chapter 5. It's always handy if you're giving a speech, giving a talk on the Bible, to have your Bible in front of you. 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and at verses 10 and 11. This is where we get our title from for this class today. We must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. That's the first words of verse 10, as you can see. But it doesn't actually mean that. If you understand by that we will all appear, then that's not what Paul means. Of course we're all going to appear. Every responsible person, whether they are baptised or unbaptised, will appear in person at the judgment seat. He doesn't mean that. This word appear here is the Greek word phaneroo. And it's used 3 times in these 2 verses. You can see the other 2. They're rendered by 2 English words in verse 11. Paul says in verse 11, knowing therefore the terror, the phobos, we met that word in 1 John, of the Lord, we persuade men, because he is a consuming fire. You don't mess around with him. But he says, we are made manifest unto God. And I trust also made manifest in your consciences. So this is the same Greek word that is rendered appear. So let's Let's render it the same way as it is in verse 11. For we must all be made manifest before the judgment seat of Christ. And the next part of the sentence explains what that means. That everyone may receive the things in body. Now you'll notice I've crossed out in the AV the italicised word done and the italicised word his. They're not actually there in the text. And this word in here is the Greek word dia. It means through. So let's translate it that way. That everyone may receive the things through body according to that he hath done, whether good or bad. So this is simply telling us that the outcome of the judgment will demonstrate the quality of the life. If we are on the right path and we are doing good, it will be shown by the change of nature to immortality. If it is evil, then that will be shown by the corruption that will overtake us in whatever period of judgment Christ specifies as necessary, few stripes or many. And we will end up involved in the second death. So it's about outcomes. That's what the judgment is about. It's about destinies, resolving the destinies of everyone who appears there. I want you to come and have a look with me at the picture that is presented by the Lord on this matter in Matthew 25. This is another one of those scriptures that's discussed at length. The suggestion, of course, we know comes from some ancient writings in our community that Matthew 25:31 to 46 is all about a national judgment. Well, whatever relationship it might have to that, that's not what the context demands. Because you see, this context begins in the Olivet prophecy. It's all part of the same speech. And what we have is three parables in Matthew 25, all of which expand upon Matthew 24 verse 45, which says this: Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household to give them their food in due season? So the parable of the 10 virgins is all about wisdom. And the word wise occurs 4 times in that parable. Who then is a faithful and wise servant? And the parable of the talents that follows it from verses 14 to 30 is all about faithfulness. 4 times the word faithful is used in that parable. So what's the parable of the sheep and goats about? It's about stewardship and the reward for faithful stewardship. Lord, when did we see thee naked or hungry or thirsty? See, it's about feeding God's people and the reward that you get for that, or of course the judgment you get if you don't meet that requirement. So that's the context. Now I could say a whole lot more about that, but the clock is ticking. So we'll leave that. If you have any doubts about what this context, come and see me. I'll give you some quotes out of Eureka. Verse 31, he says this: When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. Son of Man is a title of Christ's delegated authority to judge. John chapter 5 tells us that. This is not about his relationship to humanity, although he has that. It's about his right as the second Adam who's restored dominion over carnal things to judge on God's behalf. Judgment, he says, has been given to me because I am the Son of Man. It's a title from Psalm 8. Psalm 8's about restoration of dominion, lost by Adam in the garden. So here he is, he's the judge. He will come with glory and he'll sit upon a throne. Some say, well, this must surely be the throne in Jerusalem, throne of David. Well, I would suggest that whatever throne Christ sits upon is a throne of glory. He's sitting on one now, at the right hand of the Father. And when he comes and sits upon a judgment throne, it will be a throne of glory, and it will be the glory of God that has to be upheld in this place. And before him shall be gathered all nations. It doesn't mean, of course, all nations literally. It means representatives of all nations. And the disciples would have been completely bemused by this. They had no idea that the gospel would go to the Gentiles. And Christ is informing them that that was going to happen. that there would be many Gentiles who would come into the faith in subsequent centuries. And he shall separate them one from another as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. Do you notice the language? Now, if you divide sheep from goats, it suggests that the goats are more numerous, and it's a much easier task to separate the fewer sheep. Now, that's a sad fact, isn't it? But it ought not to be so, because there's no specified number of the redeemed. We are the arbiters of our destiny. We're the ones who make the choices as to whether we're sheep or goats at the judgment seat of Christ. And there's nothing in between. You know, there's no like evolutionary half creature. You know, we don't read about a she-oat, you know, half sheep, half goat, do we? At the judgment seat, brothers and sisters, we only have two choices. And it's as simple as A, B, C. Everybody understands the behaviour and the character of sheep and goats. And he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. The sheep will go to his right hand, the goats will go to his left. And we'll talk a bit later about process. There is a process. Christ is not going to interview people. Or there'll be some people who want to be interviewed. In Matthew chapter 7 they will say, when he waves them to the left, they will say, "But Lord, you must have got this wrong. You were in our streets. We listened to you. We did all sorts of things in your name." He says, "I never knew you," as he waves them to the left. He's not going to interview people. If Christ interviewed everyone at the judgment seat, and we've just estimated this, if he interviewed them for a minute, it's going to take him 10 years. If he interviewed them for an hour, personally, it would take him 1,100 years. So that's not the process. All he does is separate people who are brought to him by the angels as a shepherd divides sheep from goats. All he's got to do is wave or smile. So as they come towards him in contemporary groups, and we'll talk about that briefly in a moment, all he does is he sits on the throne, smiles. Got a picture? It's going to happen to us all very, very soon. Inescapable. That will determine our destiny. But in actual fact, our destiny will have been determined before. It'll be determined by our choice of being a sheep or a goat. So what about these animals? Sheep are dependent upon their shepherd. Goats are independent. And I can give you a long, discussion on the character of goats if you want. Sheep are submissive and goats are rebellious. Sheep are willing, goats are callous and disinterested. Sheep are obedient, goats are disobedient. Sheep are gregarious, they love being with their fellow sheep. But goats tend to be solitary. They want to climb the high mountains, stand atop the mountain and sniff the breeze alone. Sheep in the Middle East were white, and goats were normally black. So their coat tells something about their character. And sheep are selective eaters, whom the shepherd will guide beside the still waters. And they will eat the food provided by the shepherd, whereas a goat will eat anything. Goats will chew on leather. They will even try tin cans. They don't care. They'll try it. And we live in a world that is dishing up all sorts of rubbish, trash, filth. And it's out there to be savoured, isn't it? So what do we eat, brothers and sisters? What do we consume? That which is provided by the shepherd, or that which is provided by the world? That's the exhortation in that, isn't it? It's pretty simple. So we're the ones who make the choices today as to whether or not we're going to be sheep or goats. That's the big question. There's nothing in between. So he goes on to say in Matthew 25 and verse 33, 34, "And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. He said in the Messianic Psalm, Psalm 16, Thou wilt show me the path of life. It's to the right hand, isn't it? At thy right hand, he says, there are pleasures forevermore. That's certainly going to be true for those who pass to his right hand. Now, I'd love to go on and talk about what he has to say to both of these classes, because there's an interesting thing. I just want to point one thing out. Have you noticed this? Compare verse 40 and verse 45 of Matthew 25. To those who are accepted, he says, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren. Now, get the picture in your mind. He turns to those on the right before he addresses those on the left. In fact, he immortalises those on the right before he rejects those on the left. Because we're told in Luke 13 that you will see Abraham, Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom, but you yourselves will be thrust out. The only time that that crowd over there will see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob as immortals is at the judgment seat. So he's going to immortalise this group over here. He turns and he speaks these words, Inasmuch as ye have done unto one of these, the least of my brethren. But look at verse 45. This is the other side. Then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, he does not say, my brethren. But many of them were. And those who objected and said, Look, I shouldn't be going to this side, he said, I never knew you. They're not his brethren. Wow. Don't think I want to be there. So I better get my act together and make sure I'm a sheep. Now, we're told in verse 31 of Matthew, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him. The angels have a major role to play in the judgment process, brothers and sisters. No time to go into detail, just summarise. They will accompany Christ when he returns as judge of the household. The results of the judgment are to be declared in their presence, and they will remove, one of their last tasks actually, will be to remove and to punish the rejected. So why? Why do they have such a huge role in the judgment process? Well, because of Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 14. We're told of the angels, are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister for them who shall be heirs of salvation? That word ministering, liturgikos, means public servants. They're divine public servants, and they work a lot harder than, normal public servants of today, of which I used to be one, so I know. They're sent forth. The word is apostello, to send forth, to equip and dispatch on a mission. To minister, eis diakonia in the Greek, literally with a view to service. Isn't that interesting? So the angels are sent forth. When you're baptised, and maybe a fraction before, an angel is sent by Christ. Before he was at the right hand was Yahweh, who through Michael sent an angel forth to minister. So he's there. Jacob recognised that. Genesis 48 verse 16, the angel which has been with me all my days. Took him a while to realise it. But he was there. He was told that in Genesis 28, angels ascending and descending upon him. Ascending? Yeah, they were already with him. So the angel's there, it's just that we don't always recognise it. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody else. Why? Well, to minister to those who God wants in the kingdom. Now, they can't take you by the arm and say, now listen here, you are going to go in this direction. Can't do that. But they can manipulate. They can put doors, closed doors in your path. You've struck a few of those in time, haven't you? They can do all sorts of things like that, but they can't force you to act like a sheep if you really want to act like a goat. So that's why they're sent forth, and that's why they have a role in judgment, because they have a role not just on that day, but they have a role today as recorders of our life. Now, there are two books with which we are associated. There is a book of the life. It's an individual account of our daily lives. And there is the book of life. It is a record of the names of all the redeemed. And Christ said to his disciples, don't rejoice that you can cast out spirits. Rejoice that your names are written in the book of life. And when we're baptised, our name is written in there. At the end of our probation, it's either left there or it's erased. In the case of Israel in the wilderness, it was there for 2 years. And then it was erased for the vast multitude of them. God could do no more with them. They were all goats. So what about these books? Are they literal or are they figurative? Well, I'm not going to debate that issue. I don't really care. I think they're literal, but if they don't turn out to be literal, well then you won. And that won't matter, will it? David thought they were literal. Thou tellest my wanderings, he says, put thou my tears, that's figurative, put thou my tears into thy bottle. Then he says this, are they not written in thy book? Now that word tellus means to score with a mark, to tally as a record. The word book, sifra, comes from kafar. This word means a writing or a record. So there's a record, whether it's written down or not, there is a record of what we do in our life that determines direction, purpose and motivation. Now this is not about, the angel doesn't record that you cleaned your teeth this morning after you had breakfast. He's not interested in that kind of detail. He's interested in the choices you make, the places you go, the things you do that indicate your purpose, your direction in life. Now there are records taken. Now most of you are familiar with this passage in Malachi chapter 3 and verse 16. Then they that feared Yahweh spake often one to another, and he hearkened, and he heard it. And the book of remembrance was written. Now this word zikron means a memento, to mark and to remember. Was written, graved or written down before him. That means before his presence. Now this was based on the ancient practice. You'll remember that the king could not sleep in the days of Mordecai the Jew, who had revealed the plot to assassinate him. Remember that? In the book of Esther, chapter 6, he could not sleep, so he brought the musicians in and it didn't work. So he brought in the records of the kingdom. Now usually when you read a book, you go to sleep. It didn't work with him. But he read the record of how Mordecai had revealed the plot against his life. So he asked the question, did we do anything about this? They said no. Well, we'll fix that up. And you know the rest of the story, it's history. So every day in the life of the Persian king, at the end of the day, his scribes came in, they sat before his face and he dictated to them, and others dictated to them what had happened in that day that was important in relation to the kingdom. I believe the same happens. You know, Matthew 18 verse 10, Christ said, aren't you aware, he says, that the angels of God are always before the face of my Father in heaven? But how does that reconcile with Psalm 34 verse 7? That the angels of God encamp around those who fear him. Well, what happens, brothers and sisters, is that during the day when you're awake, they're with you. Unseen, they're with you. But when you go to bed and you're quite safe, they go back to the Father. And they can traverse by spirit travel huge, immense distances like that. So there's no sensation of travel from here to the heaven of heavens. It's like that. You and I will get to know a bit about that shortly. Okay? So when they get back to the Father, what do? Sit there and twiddle their thumbs? No. A book of remembrance was written in his presence for them that feared the Lord and that thought upon his name. So what goes in the record? Well, this word thought gives us a clue. Chashab, it means to plait, to weave, to compute by mental effort. It's talking about people who actually give some thought as to what they're going to do to weave into their lives the character of their God, the behaviour of their God, and in our case, the behaviour of our Lord, Jesus Christ. You give some thought to that. And if you do, and if you discuss that with your brothers and sisters or with your wife or husband, guess what happens? Goes in the record. because that's about purpose, that's about direction, that's about decisions, it's about choices, isn't it? God makes a record of that because that's an index to your character. It's an index to where you're going. So what's not found in these books then? Because not everything that the angel records every day is going to be terribly salubrious, is it? At least in my life. Well, this is what God says about these records. Isaiah 43:25, I, even I, am he that blotteth out thy transgressions for mine own sake, and will not remember thy sins. Now, there's a certain basis upon which he does that. Proverbs 28:13 and 14, I love these verses. He that covereth his sins shall not prosper. David did that for 9 months. And it ate him out. But whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. So there's 2 steps there. Confession, acknowledgement that is, and forsaking. Changing your way. Trying to do better. Whoso confesseth and forsaketh them shall have mercy. There's no if, buts or maybes about that, brothers and sisters. Happy is the man that feareth, this is reverential fear, always, but he that hardeneth his heart, like David did for 9 months and says, I'm going to hide this. He's in trouble. He shall fall into mischief, as David did, until he acknowledged and forsook. So he says in Psalm 51 verse 9 about the sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, hide thy face from my sins and blot out all mine iniquities. That's exactly what God did in the case of David. Psalm 103 verse 12 we read, as far as the east is from the west, so far hath he removed our transgressions from us. So he will and he can forgive where there is confession, the upholding of his righteousness and a change of direction. Getting back on the path again. He will forgive. But it's a curious, an intriguing fact. But at the judgment seat, not one word about David's sin with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah will be mentioned to him. But the historical record will remain forever in the scripture for all to read. So people living at the end of the millennium will still read about David's sin with Bathsheba and the murder of Uriah. But at the judgment seat, when the angel goes through the record with David, and that's what the angel's there for, when the angel comes into David's tent and opens that record, not one single word will be spoken to him about his sin. How do we know that's true? Well, Ezekiel 18 verses 21 and 22 tell us that. But if the unrighteous man forsakes his way and abandons his way and turns and serves me and does that which is right, saith Yahweh, his sins will not be mentioned unto him. They're gone. They're erased from the book, brothers and sisters. So when David's record is opened by the angel, when he gets to the section of that portion of his life where he messed up big time, there's going to be some huge blanks. Blanks covering 9 months' worth of hardening of heart. All gone. And you'll see the angel going through the scroll. Not much here, is there? Blank. That's how we can be blameless at the judgment seat of Christ. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1:8, who shall also confirm you unto the end, that ye may be blameless in the day of judgment. That's what he means. 2 Peter 3:14, wherefore, beloved, seeing that ye look for such things, be diligent, that ye may be found of him in peace, that is, in fellowship, without spot, that is, you got your act together, and blameless, nothing laid to your charge at all. Jude, verse 24, now unto him that is able to keep you, word means powerful, from falling, and to present you faultless. Good grief. Faultless? Me? You? Yes. Why? Well, because you acknowledge your faults. And you don't go to bed at night without acknowledging before your God your failings, big and small. Doesn't mean you have to go through the whole list. It means you acknowledge that you failed that day. The Father knows full well what you did. And so does the angel. And he's recorded some of those things, if not all. So you acknowledge it and say, you messed up on this or that. And the angel is instructed to erase the record. It's not going to be there the next day. And if Christ comes the next day, you are faultless. No sins. Nothing to be raised by the angel in the tent. Wouldn't that be terrific? Well, it's more than possible. It's what the Father wants, brothers and sisters. It's what he wants. That's why he gave his Son. So we could be faultless and blameless at the judgment seat. He wants to be manifested in us. This is a very interesting passage, Revelation 20 verse 12. It's about the second resurrection and judgment at the end of the millennium. And it's very revealing. And I saw the dead, this is the second resurrection, 1,000 years after the return of Christ, small and great, stand before God. So the mortals who are responsible, which would be the bulk of them, all of them, who have died, and those living will be there. And the books were opened. Books? Yeah. One book for each responsible person. Just like there's one book written about you and one about me. A book of your life. A record of your life. The books were opened. And another book, this is a singular book, was opened, which is the book of life. So what's used for the process of judgment? And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books. Yes, the individual records of the life of mortals in the kingdom age. We asked the question, who do you think might open those books? If it's the angels who do that, when Christ returns for us, who do you think might do it for the mortal responsible people at the end of the 1,000 years? You got it right in one. You. Because you will be the recorders. You'll be the ones who will be assigned people, and you'll go around tapping them. This doesn't happen to us. You'll go around tapping on the shoulder, saying, hey, you, this is the way, walk ye in it. Because if you don't, I'm going to start recording. Okay? So we, brothers and sisters, will open those books. So what's the purpose of judgment? It's to determine motivation. Now this is another very important passage in our Bibles. 1 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 5. Paul was accused of being an unfaithful steward. There were those who accused him of improper motivation. You know, enemies always find a way to cast aspersion on people they don't like. And there were some in the Corinthian ecclesia who didn't like him at all. So they cast aspersions on him and said, Paul, you're doing this because you want self-aggrandizement. You want to be fed by it. All those sorts of accusations were made. That's why he refused to accept from some ecclesias any help at all. So that nobody could make those sort of accusations. That's why he says in verse 1, let a man so account of us as the ministers of Christ and the stewards of the secrets of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. But with me it's a very small thing that I should be judged of you, because some of you are criticising me, he says. He says this in verse 4. For I know nothing by myself. The word by there should be rendered as the RV does, against. He says, I know nothing against myself. I stood in judgment. Like I said to you in chapter 11, I come and I examine myself. I examine my motivation when I sit down to partake of bread and wine. I do that, brethren. And I don't know of anything that justifies your criticisms. Got a picture where he's coming from? Well, look at verse 5. Therefore judge nothing before the time. He doesn't mean make no judgments. He's talking about the judgment of people's motives. And you can't do that and I can't do that. Only Christ will judge people's motives. That's what he says here. Until the Lord come, who will both bring to light the hidden things of darkness and will make manifest, there's our word phaneroo. He's going to bring it to the open. He's going to make apparent. He's going to show openly what he calls the counsels of the hearts. Now this word counsels is the Greek word boule. It means the will, the determination, the propensity, the purpose, the design, the plan. In other words, it's about what's in the engine room of your life. And that's why Weymouth translates it, I think, very accurately. He says, he will disclose the motives. Judgment is about finding out what's in your engine room. What is it that's motivating you? What's driving you? Why do you make the choices you make? Well, it goes in the record. The record's going to tell the judge what's driving you. It's going to tell the judge whether you're a sheep or a goat. One final thing on the technicalities. Romans 14, just back a little way in our Bibles. Romans 14 is very helpful as well. Verses 10 to 12. It's in the context of brethren judging brethren over issues like holy days and what you ate. Why do you judge thy brother, he says, and why dost thou set at naught thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Now, in fact, in the Greek text, the word theos is used. Not Christos, theos. It should be rendered God. We shall all stand before the judgment seat of God. Proof, next verse. For it is written, so he quotes Isaiah 45:23. As I live, saith the Lord, and that's Yahweh in the Old Testament, every knee shall bow to me and every tongue shall confess to God. So we're actually going to stand before the judgment seat of God. Why? Why the change from Christ? Well, because, you see, this is about process. This is about confessing. Every tongue shall confess to God. You're not going to do this before Christ. He won't have time to interview you, but the angels will. And they will have people going right back to Adam to interview. This word confess, exologimo, means to speak out and to confess fully. But he goes on and he says this in verse 2. This is the explanatory sentence. So then every one of us shall give account of himself to God. This word account is logos. It means the word spoken as an expression of the thoughts of the mind. An account or an exposition. So the angel is going to get from us an exposition. As he goes through the record, he's going to say, what did you make that decision for? And we're going to have to talk. You know, use these things. We have to talk. Every tongue shall confess to God. Ready for that? It's going to happen. But you don't need to be frightened about that if the record has big gaps in it through the erasure by the angel of that which has been forgiven, because there will be no mention of it. Now that's comforting, isn't it? But there's still a huge responsibility upon us. So let's summarise this process of judgment. The angels raise the dead and transport them to Sinai. We saw that in 1 Thessalonians 4:16. They collect the responsible living and transport them to Sinai. Same chapter, verse 17. They interview each responsible person. That's what we're reading about in Romans 14. And they bring contemporary groups before Christ's judgment throne, beginning with the final generation and working back to Adam. Now, why can I say that with confidence? Well, because of the parable that Christ gave in Matthew 20. Remember what he said about the vineyard, the labourers in the vineyard? How that the master of the vineyard goes out in the morning and he has a contract with people for a penny a day. That's about Jews living under law. There was a contract between them and God. It was the Mosaic covenant. And the Jews thought they could earn their way into the kingdom. But you see, the labourers who came later on in the day, who represent the Gentiles, there was no contract with them. When you got baptised, did you sign a contract? No. You were told, like those labourers, whatever is right, I'll give to you. Okay? You came into the field on the basis of faith. You had faith that the owner of the vineyard would give you the right reward. True? So who comes before the owner of the vineyard first? Well, you know as well as I do who comes first, don't you? The ones who came at 5 p.m. in the afternoon. The last ones who came into the vineyard. Who's that? That's you and me, brothers and sisters. And it goes back, right back to the ones who came first. So who came first? Who's going to be the last one to stand before Christ? Brought up in his contemporary generation like you and I will be brought in ours. You know, if I was in the group of Abraham, that'd make no sense. Because we are told that we're going to be embarrassed. If we're rejected, we'll be embarrassed. Well, Abraham doesn't know me from a bar of soap. So I could hold my head high, to a point. But you know me, and I'll be very embarrassed if I go to the left and you go to the right. So we'll go in contemporary groups, Adam the last. Won't that be interesting? Especially if you're on the right-hand side. And even he, I believe, can be forgiven. And I think he may well be there. That's not my choice. But in all of this, brothers and sisters, the righteousness of God will be upheld. That's why there's a judgment seat. That's why there will be those who will be rejected there. I'm not going to go through all that. We haven't got time. Just one final exhortation. Revelation 22, verses 11 and 12. He that is unjust, let him be unjust still. Now, listen, this is Christ talking. You just imagine if he was here at this podium saying these words to you, because that's effectively what it is. Listen, brethren and sisters, if you're unjust, just stay the way you are. Eh? Can you imagine Christ saying that to us? No. Does he want you to remain filthy? No. So what's he saying? He cannot be saying, look, I don't really care. If you're filthy, just stay filthy. He can't be saying that, and he isn't. What he's saying this, brothers and sisters, this is the last chapter of the Bible. It's the last chapter of the book of Revelation. So the whole message is there. The visions of glory are there. John's just prostrated himself before an angel. The angel says, get up, John. You're going to be where I am. You're going to be like the angel shortly. You're going to rule the world, John. Get up off your feet. What he's saying here is, if after all of that that's gone before, and all these visions of glory, you can't get your act together, then you don't deserve to be there. But he does say this, he that is holy, sanctified, let him be holy still. Behold, I come quickly, and my reward is with me to give every man according as his work shall be. Is he a sheep? Or is he a goat? We make that choice, but time is running out to make the necessary changes to our life.